Christmas truce. And I don't know, I was not a military guy. I'm grateful for our soldiers and the sacrifice that they made, but all of my friends in high school, we took this test called the ASVAB test. I don't know if you guys have taken it or know people who take it. Well, that's to let military know about like your aptitude for service. And so all of my friends there, we took the test and they're like, yeah, I got a call from like the Marine recruiter. I'm like, yeah, I got a call from, nobody called me. They didn't want me. But you hear, one of the things you hear about our military, about our soldiers fighting in war, is that it's a brotherhood, that you have the next person's back, because you're not just fellow soldiers, you're brothers in arms. HBO several years ago came out with a mini-series called Band of Brothers that talked about this bond and this journey through World War II. And so we talk about being connected in unity. We talk about community. We talk about coming together as a church. And I think that we see in the Christmas truce of 1914 a beautiful display of what should happen in the church. Because you've got enemies, people who hate you, people who like just earlier that day are shooting each other, throwing stuff at each other, like trying to kill each other. They put those things aside and they come together for a moment to worship the Savior. And what we've begun last week is a series of sermons called Connected, My Life in the Church. And last week, Brother David preached about how it's Jesus Christ forms the basis for our unity. He talked about the blessing of church membership. And that's something a lot of times we don't really agree with, or we're like, I don't know what's the blessing of church membership. But when you really think about it, it is a blessing for us to be here, to be a part of a church. And so what we're hoping to see over the course of this sermon series is that the Holy Spirit would move and it would band us together a whole lot more, that we would come together in unity, that we would come together to grow both spiritually and numerically, that we would come together and build relationships with one another, that we would pray together, that we would worship together, that we would serve together. We want to see this church turned upside down because we want to see this church come together. And so as we walk through this, that's our hope for you. Not just for you, for us as well. And so this morning, what we're going to talk about is being connected in unity, because unity is one of the most important things of the church. How many of you, let's do true confessions for a second. How many of you, and you don't have to raise your hand, but it'll be fun, all right? How many of you have had a disagreement with someone in this church before? I mean, come on. There's a whole lot of you, and you're like, I'm not raising my hand because I don't want them to know, right? What I want us to see and understand this morning is this, is we're not going to necessarily be talking about disagreements. We're going to talk about the importance of us coming together, what it is that draws us together, what's the foundation, what's the basis of us coming together, what are some characteristics that show that we are a unified body of believers, that we are a unified family of faith. One of the things that we've talked about as a staff is I guess it's me just trying to stir the pot a little bit, is I'm still trying to wrap my head around this idea of family ministry. I talked to several people time and time again, and they're like, so what is it you're doing with family ministry? And I'm like trying to figure it out. And it's funny that one of the things that we're really going to look at is this idea of a family of faith. And we've talked about that as a staff, that we would be known, this church, Little Cypress Baptist Church, would be known as a family of faith, that we are a family of families. You look across this room and you see people, you can do that, you can look around, it's okay. I know you're doing it anyway. But you look across this church and you see people from one end of the spectrum to the other. You see people from one age of end of the spectrum to do with age, from senior citizen to all the way to little bitty children. You've got people who are working and people who aren't working, people who are in school and people who aren't in school. You've got so many different life experiences just in this church. But when you really think about it, one of the amazing things is that God takes all of those little differences and He brings us together. And so this morning, we're going to look at a passage in Ephesians where Paul writes to the Christians in Ephesus, and he talks to them about their calling as believers, what it is they're called to, what are some characteristics that should be seen in the church, and lastly, what's the basis of the foundation. So take your Bibles and turn them to Ephesians chapter 4. Ephesians chapter 4. Now, while you're turning there, I'm going to lay some ground for you. And most of you probably know this, but humor me. When you read most of Paul's letters, the letters that he wrote to the churches, usually what you see is the first half of the letter is very heavily doctrine. He's trying to lay the foundations. He's explaining the gospel and what that means and what that, how that changes you and what it means to be in Christ. That's what Paul usually spends the first part of his letters doing. And then there's this big transition in every single letter that he writes to churches. And it's, here's what you should believe, all right? Here's the doctrine. And then he makes the move and he says, and now this is what it looks like for you to live this stuff out. This is what happens in your heart and in your life when you live this stuff out. All right? And what we're going to look at today is we're going to look at one of those transitions in Paul's letter to the Ephesian Christians. And so Ephesians chapter 4, let's start looking in verse 1. Now, we've been talking about doctrine just before this. Paul is praying for spiritual strength for the Ephesian Christians. And then he begins this transition, all right? He says, I therefore, a prisoner for the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to the one hope that belongs to your call, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. Now, this is what we're going to do this morning, is we're going to go back and we're going to walk through these 6 verses, and we're going to see the calling that we have as Christians, as individual Christians. And we're going to look at some things that ought to characterize us as a community, as a family of faith. And then we're going to look at the basis. Why are we here? What is it that draws us together? What allows us to have community? So let's go back to verse 1. Paul says, again, he's transitioning now. He says, I therefore, a prisoner for the Lord. He says, I urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called. What I want us to focus in verse 1 is that statement, walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you've been called. Now, it sounds a little redundant, right? All right. Everybody laugh one time for me, please. Okay. At least I know a couple of you. So, it's a little redundant. He says, walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called. So he's talking about calling. And what I want us to see first and foremost is this, is that as Christians, as individual Christians, you have been called to be a part of something. And so what is it that we have been called? What is Paul talking about here? Well, we got to understand this, that Paul is writing to a church. And so when he says you, he's not pointing out, Alan, and he's not pointing out specific people. He's pointing out this whole church. He says the manner in which you have been called. As individual Christians, you have been called together to join into community. It's something that David talked about last week, and we're probably going to hit it in some way or another every single week. That you are not called to be an individual Christian. We have this mentality, and I don't know if it's just in America or it's all over the world in Christianity today, that, well, it's just me and my personal relationship with the Lord, and no one else has any say-so whatsoever. And it is. It is a personal relationship between you and the Lord. Yes, but there's more to it than that. What we see here is this, is that we have a calling. And this calling goes all the way back to Genesis. It goes all the way back to Abram. Abram hanging out, living with his dad at 70 years old. He's living in Ur. He's just hanging out, doing nothing probably. And all of a sudden, the Lord comes to him and he says, I want you to leave everything that you've ever known. I want you to leave your father's house. I want you to leave the comfort that's there. And I want you to go to a land that I'm going to show you. And so Abram packs his stuff up, packs his wife, packs his nephew, and they head out. And they go. And what you see in that is that God is calling Abram for a specific reason. Ultimately, it's so that salvation can come to the world through Jesus Christ. You don't believe me? Go read. Don't do it right now, but this evening, this afternoon, go read Matthew chapter 1, the genealogy of Jesus Christ. It begins with Abram, or Abraham. His name was changed, not to protect the innocent, but because God changes people. All right? That's for free. But what you see is that's the main reason. But what you see in that is this, is that God is calling out a specific people. You see Abram, who becomes Abraham. You see Isaac. You see Jacob. And then out of that, God creates an entire nation, a people to represent himself. A people for other nations to look at and see, yes, there is a God. This God is powerful. This God is worthy of my devotion. This God is worthy of my praise. He's worthy of everything that I am and everything that I have. That is what God called all the way back in Genesis 4. And this is something that is continued over and over and over. See, God didn't just save us to call us as individual Christians. God did not save us. Pastor Matt Chandler says this, that the gospel creates not just people individually, but a people collectively. And so this calling that we see in verse 1 is that you were called to be a part of a body of believers or a family of faith, a church. That you're not to isolate yourself, that you are not to go sit in some remote mountain village in a room all by yourself. That we are called and we are meant to join together. We need one another. We need one another. Sometimes it is good. I guess I'm that. Is it introverted? Is that the right? I can't ever remember. The one where you just kind of want to be left alone a little bit. Sometimes I'm like that. And it's okay. There are those different types of personalities. But ultimately, we are called. God has called us. He's saved us to join us together. To give us a family. He's adopted us. He's made us sons and daughters. And so that means we have brothers and sisters. Amen. And sometimes our family gets a little dysfunctional, right? Amen. Man, y'all are excited about that when kids are very dysfunctional. I can say that because I come from a really big family. Some of y'all know my dad's side of the family, and you know they're crazy. And so it's true hurts sometimes. But, excuse me. Sometimes we get a little dysfunctional, we get a little crazy, but we're a family. We need one another. We have to lean on one another. We have to encourage one another. We have to pray for one another. And one of the most important things that we need to do is serve together. Neither of these families are here today, and so I'm going to encourage you, though, when they get back in a week or two, that you pull aside the Day family and the Henson family. And you talk with them a little bit about Serve Family Camp. I'll be honest with you, I was a little disappointed. Some of you are like, what? We did family camp back in June. And it was the first time we've ever done anything like that. It was an exciting time. I'll be honest, I was kind of let down that I had like 2 families show up. But it ended up being a great experience for both those families and my family. That we were able to get to know them a little bit better. That they were able to serve alongside of one another, that they were able to actually even go have a little bit of fun and things like that. So, shameless plug for everybody in here. Next summer, we're going to do Serve Family Camp yet again. So, go ahead. If you're interested, I have the dates penciled in on their calendar, and once January rolls around and that area of my budget exists again, I'll pay our deposit and we'll be inked in and stuff. But the point I'm trying to make is this. Is the reason we did that camp, the reason we went for that experience is because I think it's important that family members, that children see their parents serving. And that means them serving outside of the church walls, but it also means serving inside of the church walls. And so I know some of you are sitting here and you're thinking, well, my kids are growing gone, but are you still being faithful to your service? Here's another shameless plug for being faithful in service. Next week is VBS. And a couple weeks ago, I got to preach and I said something about VBS, and I heard a lot of amens. And I know some of those voices that I heard didn't sign up to work at VBS. It's not too late. VBS is a great opportunity, one of the best opportunities for us to speak truth into the lives of children and their parents. And children need to see, not just women, all right? I'm kind of, wandering off a little bit. I'll get back to unity and community in a second. But you've been called as a part of this church to serve. And so VBS isn't just a woman thing. VBS is a thing for men too. And Brother David ratted some of you guys out. Y'all used to serve in VBS. And somebody wore a frog on their head. Well, the funny thing is, one of our group names is the Bullfrogs this year. So whoever that is, if you want to resurrect that bullfrog hat and you want to bring it out, we would love to have you come and serve your VBS, because we have been called to come in together as this community so that we can go out and minister to this community. So it's a calling. God doesn't say, I want to save you just so that you and I can go sit together and hang out together. No, he says, I want to save you so that you can become a part of a family. Here's the other thing. Some people in this church are some of the only family that some people have ever had. Think about that. Think about that for just one moment. That some people in this church, this is the only family that they get to really experience. And so we're called to join together as a community, and that means that we need to be building some relationships with people. And so it's a calling, it's an expectation. So that's our first step. We have to understand that, and then we begin to move. And Paul talks about some of the characteristics that should be seen in a church. So let's pick back up in verse 2. He says, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace. Let's look very quickly at 4 characteristics that we should see. Now, before we dive off into that, I want you to understand this. This list is nowhere near exhaustive. He doesn't list it all because there are other letters that he writes of things that should characterize a church. This is just kind of a very basic thing, very basic understanding. And so my challenge to you is to come back to church so that you can learn more about the expectations and the things that ought to characterize the church. So let's pick out these 4 things. Number 1, you see, with all humility. Now, humility is probably a very tough thing for us, a lot of us, to really discover and work towards in our heart and our life. We have this mentality where we look at this person and we look at that person and we see their struggles and we think, well, they're a little bit worse off than I am because I don't struggle like them. And sometimes we look at other people and we say, well, they're not quite as spiritual as I am. They don't pray as well as I do. They don't pray as long as I do. And their Bible doesn't have as many lines and highlights as mine does. And so, I'm great. And one time I've even heard a sermon that was entitled, The Best Sermon on Humility That You'll Ever Hear. And so humility is something that we really struggle with, right? So how do we discover humility? What does it mean?